Welcome to the Truvantis Risk Radar. I'm John McGinnis, and my guests today are the PCI Dream Team. On behalf of Truvantis and myself, we are proud and excited to welcome them to the first stop of their 2023 book tour. The guys are celebrating the release of their new book, The Definitive Guide to PCI DSS version 4. This is part 2 of my 3-part interview with the team. In part 2, the guys dive into PCI DSS version 4, starting with big changes regarding the all-new customized approach to PCI DSS compliance, and how it will stir controversy in the field. Last year, you weren't really sure how 4.0 was going to shake out with regards to the customized controls versus the old CCWs. And another thing that jumped out at me, I know there's a lot of use of CCWs, and I've seen this in my life, but you point out that 98% of the time that the compensating controls are used, it's because there's legacy technology in the stack that they just can't afford to, or they just don't want to get rid of. And so then they go through the gymnastics of writing these compensating controls, which is also another scary factoid.
Well, yes and no. I mean, everybody thinks because something's old, like a mainframe, that it's a bad thing. And at the end of the day, mainframes today can do everything that Linux, Windows, and all this other stuff can do. And sadly, it does it quicker, better, faster at a lower price point per transaction. And I know that irritates a lot of people, but when you make a reservation for an airline, when you use your credit card somewhere, there's a mainframe that processes that transaction because it can do it in the 2 seconds of round trip time that you see at that cash register, that browser session you're in. That doesn't happen with Windows or Linux. That happens because of a mainframe. So all these people that think, mainframes are bad and they're old and they're creaky, the code might be, no doubt about that, but the code's been hard tested. I mean,
Right.
We know it works all the time, and we know how it's going to work. This new stuff that people write just isn't as proven. And so as a result, if you run into problems, 99% of the time, it's because the code isn't that old.
Yeah, that's okay. Interesting point then. What have you learned since last year about the customized approach? Are the people that use the CCWs going to go for the customized approach, or is the customized approach for a completely different kind of organization?
They're both going to still be around. The CCW wasn't replaced by the customized approach. And so that's because a lot of people think that. And what's really weird is the combinations of things that can happen. So one of the things you'll notice with version 4 is not every requirement is even eligible for a customized approach. In fact, if the requirement is eligible, it's noted in there that it can use a customized approach. But it also, many of the requirements will say this requirement is not eligible for a customized approach. Because let's face it, some of the basic security 101 things, it's an on or an off. It's a 1 or a 0. You do it or you don't. Now, could you use a compensating control for those? Yes. So that's the one difference right there. If one of the if one of the requirements says not eligible for the customized approach, well, it still could perhaps be covered by a compensating control.
Well, the council has even said, which we all kind of argued about, kind of poo-pooed, but the council has said every requirement in the DSS can be covered by a compensating control.
Yep, that's right. They've always said that.
Well,
we've always poo-pooed it too, right?
No, except in 321, Section 3, 321, 322, and 323, you
Right.
can't mark them not applicable, and you
That's right.
cannot cover them with the CCW, which is the storage of the PAN
Mhm.
unencrypted. But in the new version, I can't remember, it's 3111, 3112, whatever. Same requirements, just new numbering. The council says that you can CCW those bad boys now. Not only that, you can also mark them not applicable, which is a new one. So I'm anxious to see how that's going to come off.
So when I first heard about this so-called customized approach, I immediately hearkened back to all those very passionate and heated um, arbitration sessions I've had with some of my clients, just with respect to CCWs alone. And I've run into this scenario where we have a very large client, let's say, they're spending a lot of money with our firm, and they basically write a CCW around a requirement that hasn't really, that they're trying to cover. But as a QSA, I'm looking at it going, I'm sorry, as we say in Texas, that dog don't hunt. So, I started thinking, well, if we had those kind of discussions around CCWs, with the customized approach, I think we're going to have even more turbulence and turmoil to some extent with the clients that really, once again, want to achieve compliance by arbitration and litigation as opposed to actually doing the right thing. So what that immediately means for any firm that's going to do a 4.0 engagement, there's going to be a whole lot more work that goes into the 4.0 to begin with, just because it has more requirements. But then if let's say you have a client that has several that they want to do the customized approach on, they have to do a lot of work. But then, they have to do a detailed risk assessment and make a case for why this approach is actually going to help meet or exceed the original requirement. But at the end of the day, the ultimate arbiter of whether they met that requirement is going to be the QSA, which I think is going to create a little bit more friction. So it's going to be a bit more contentious than it ever was. It's almost like the customized approach could turn into, CCWs on whiskey, gunpowder, and PCP or something. I mean, it's going to get really ugly, I fear.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'm with you on that, David, because the council has already said that the customized approach should only be used by organizations that have mature control environments, which really now the QSA's got to sit there and say, well, you're not mature enough to do this. I mean, you want to start an argument, just go ahead and tell a client that I don't deem your control environment mature enough to be able to do this.
Well, what's really funny is so I can attest if there's anything crazy in the chapter in the book on the customized approach and the compensating controls, because I wrote that one, and so anything in there that you don't like, you can yell at me. And the worst part is that now, let's really throw a monkey wrench into this, John. One of the things that you can do now is you can actually use a compensating control with the customized approach. And the example that I used is one that I am almost positive. I dug in my head and I tried to figure out, which one. And the council had this in their documentation. And the reason is because it's probably one that we're going to see this. It's the new requirement number. It used to be 6.2, but now it's 6.3.3 about patching systems. And so what's happening there is, in that example that I used in the book, is you sort of have like three different types of servers. And so what happens is you've written a customized approach to keep them all patched, but then one of the groups in there has a compensating control attached to it because of the way that it's using the customized approach. So, and then I think I don't remember the words I used, but I said something like, take a breath, breathe, think about it for a minute, because you really have to wrap your head around it. because when I was writing it, I had to wrap my head around it, and our tech editor, Jeff Mann, which, by the way, we really have to thank him for going through this. He pointed some of this out to me, so I went back and reworded it a little better and then got it through. And then, of course, and also Bob Russo wrote our forward, which was very gracious of him, and it's a wonderful forward. But I mean, when Dave was saying what he was saying about gunpowder and all, he's right, because when the council told us about this, it was at the community meeting in Vancouver several years ago when they told us about this so-called customized approach. And, I worked with these folks, some of them at the council, when I worked there for 3 years. And when Emma was up there telling us about the customized approach, I thought, there's no way, this is a joke. I really thought that they're going to come up on stage and say, we really got you guys. Because, Emma is a very, very smart person, and she's very dedicated to these standards. I mean, she produces them along with the team. And so when she started telling us about that customized approach, I remember all of us sitting in that room, we were looking at each other like, what was there? Because I don't think anything had come out yet. There was no document that had come out or anything. So this is the first all of the QSAs were hearing it. And David's thoughts were exactly what we were hearing in our heads. There's going to be cats and dogs living together, like the old Ghostbusters lines that Bill Murray had. Mass hysteria, panic in the streets,
Well, but the bottom line is it's put QSAs in between a rock and a hard place, because we're the ones that are going to have to be the enforcers of what's legitimate and what's not.
That sounds tough. The other thing that I wondered about is, how often do you get into a situation where you're helping the customer design the security, and then you sort of have a conflict of interest at that point? Does that happen at all or not?
Well, no, it's not supposed to.
No, it's not supposed to. That I think the decision that we made at Trusted Second, I can't speak for other QSA firms, but the decision that we made is if we're going to assist the clients with any of these customized approaches, we're going to use somebody on a different team. We're going to use a different, we call the group that I'm a part of is called the advisory group at Trusted Second. So we're going to, because we have some QSAs that do not do PCI work, but they are in the advisory group. And so we're probably going to either use those individuals, and it doesn't have to be a QSA. It could be any security professional to work with them to get the customized approach going and get it figured out. And then that way I'm not going in there and assessing something that I helped them design, because there's just a definite conflict of interest there. So I'm assuming almost every other company something similar.
The council has told us that basically we're not allowed to assess our own work. We never have been. So
I mean, that's standard auditing 101.
That's right. That's right. But this is a little different. I think this is a little different because it's more so we're sort of replacing, instead of using the defined approach, we're sort of replacing that with the so-called customized approach. And I think that goes a little deeper, because I think so here I'll call myself the kettle. I'll be the pot and I'll call the kettle black. One of the things that I've always done as a QSA, not so much now, but in the beginning, when we first walked into these companies, they were just an absolute mess. And I one of my first clients was a very, very large grocery store chain, and wonderful people. And the CISO there, he wanted to get this right. And so we did a lot of what I would call on the spot remediation. And we did that because, I'll be honest with you, he and I were both sort of going through this at the same time. I had just received my QSA training. It was the class in Boston that Kathy Levere lovingly refers to as the snowstorm class. The instructor couldn't get there. That was Mike Don. You guys remember Mike? He couldn't get there there from San Francisco because it was a storm. And so we all sat there and entertained ourselves. And so I come out of that class and I went to this client and, we were just stepping through it together. So I've done that over the years, especially when it's simple. Like you walk in and they're missing one patch on a box or something, and then you find out why. If you're going to fail somebody for that, I think that you're missing the whole point of PCI. You're missing the spirit and the intent of it. So I have done, and I'm very guilty of it, and anybody I've trained or mentored, I've told them, there are some on-the-spot remediations to things that you should be doing and helping with. But this is different. This is like they're saying, we're going to do this an entirely different way. And we want you to help us engineer it or get involved with what we do. And that's when now I would say, absolutely not. Nope, not getting in there, because then I have to come back and look at it for the overall assessment. So but I could see this as lucrative for QSAs, and I don't mean lucrative money-wise. I mean lucrative in terms of getting involved in a different way. What I would like to see, me personally, is that we get some QSAs that start to do this, work with clients almost exclusively on developing some of these controls. It could be a very this is a narrow space. It's a very carved out narrow space in cybersecurity, so it could widen it a little bit. We also do associate QSAs here at Trusted Sec, and because we're trying to train up some of the young folks and get them to become QSAs, because a lot of us old guys are not going to be around forever. And I see this as a potential widening of our space where you could have a whole team on your QSA group that goes out and works, especially like Jeff said, financial institutions. They're going to need a lot of help if they want to go down this road.
Well, and they're probably one of the biggest consumers of the customized approach, because in a lot of cases, the clients I've dealt with in the FI space, they're running mainframes, and the core banking system runs as a single entity, and those core systems store cardholder data. They have to in order to process debit card transactions, for example. And so as a result, you end up with a single application that's in scope and under the PCI rules. That's the cardholder data environment. Well, in order to run your business, everybody's got to connect to that thing. And so in a lot of cases, we've fashioned, for lack of a better term, a Chinese wall, where half of that is in scope and half of it is not. And you have connectivity on the not in scope side, even though it's the same app, and we're relying on access control in order to enforce that through two different connection points on the same box. And we're going through an interesting discussion now with the scoping SIG, of which I'm a member of, and people are having conniptions now about the cloud, because the cloud segmentation is not like it used to be, where you segment off the network. You're now using access control as your segmentation point. And because if you don't have access to a container that's in scope, that's how you're segmenting it out, even though you may have separate VPCs, which are network connections to stuff. And people are just scratching their heads because that's an entirely new concept, because until now, that's the first time they've seen this, whereas those of us in the old mainframe days, we were used to that. That's how you segmented things and controlled everything, because everybody was in the same CICS region, but your transactions you could run, all you could do was look at stuff. You can't manipulate it, whereas other people could manipulate it, but it's all essentially in the same app. So yeah, it's
Yeah, it's like I've always said that when folks ask me about segmentation, I go, well, I mean, what it all goes back to, no matter what approach you take, is it always goes back to controlled access. I mean, that's I mean, it is what it is. It's like if I have a pot of gold and you want it, and I can keep you out with some type of an access control, do I care that you can see the gold? No, I don't care. You can look at it all day. It's not my problem. So go ahead, look at the gold, but you can't get it. And it's a silly analogy, but it's really true. It's all about controlled access, and I love people that think there's air gap segmentation. If there's air gap segmentation, you've built a whole network. Now, I've had clients do that. I've had clients that, by nature of the business they're in, I had one client who's a very well-known transaction processor, and they literally built everything completely physically and logically air gapped. But that whole network then had to do what? Had to interface with the internet to take in transactions, or had to interface with direct private lines from different entities in order to support transaction processing. So while I was very impressed with this network that they built, it's not the real world, because the only way they could be completely air gapped is if they had gone to every acquirer and every merchant and put them inside that air gap network, which, think how silly it is. That's why when people talk to me about it, I just laugh.
Air gap connected to the internet is like the ultimate contradiction in terms.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. I know. And I think how funny that is, and when people talk to me about that, I was at an RSA conference once, and the speaker was up there talking about air gap segmentation, and I couldn't help myself. I was in the front row, and I just kept laughing and laughing. Pretty soon, the guy got so mad he called me out, and I stood up and I just said, "How can it be air gapped if it has to?" eventually interface with other people that aren't a part of that physical network? And it just floored him. And I felt terrible, but because it was like the whole presentation to me was flawed from the beginning. And, there is no such thing. One of the things I do like, but I'll tell you, I'm reading up on this stuff. You know what? You can be old, but you can always learn. I just got this book about the Azure stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because I thought I had gotten pretty good with the Amazon AWS stuff. Now I have clients that are on Azure. So it's like, so I grabbed that book because I'll tell you, the things that you can do on AWS and Azure are wonderful, but the things that you can break and the things that you can misconfigure are in my opinion, it's worse than having a co-located room with servers, and it's worse because you have to think about that whole idea of the air gapping and how so basically, there is no cloud. It's just some other guy's server. So now you have to get to that guy's server, in this case, AWS or Azure. And then you have to figure out how to keep complete barricades around all of that, and then your stuff within it, how to barricade all of that from all the other stuff. And to me, personally, I find it more complicated than the old RBAC, role-based access control that we had in the old days. You either have that role or you don't. I like that. Can't do that anymore.
Well, and that's the problem is that people make the access controls so complex that they don't realize where the holes are in their access controls. Because Coop, for example, needs access to do transactions, but he also needs to be able to admin the app that is doing it. And so when they get done messing around and adding in all the roles that he has, all of a sudden he can not only create the check, but he can also sign it and cash it.
That is true.
Another point of attack that I think David was following up on last year was the client-side browser attacks. That really jumped out as something wide open and interesting. So, what's the update on that, David?
Well, from a 4.0 thanks for bringing that up, by the way. And these guys know it's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. The council has turned a blind eye to the vulnerabilities associated with the client-side web browser. So back in the day, I did quite a bit of pen testing, and I also did testing of apps. The majority of the pen testing and the application security assessments that are done on that are actually completed for applications are focused on the server side, which means they if you talk to security people 5 years ago and application people and say, well, you got to worry about the client side browser as well, they either start laughing at you or start screaming at you. And back in even 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was no way to get any visibility into what's going on there. So what's happening is when, let's say, you hit a payment page and you decide you're going to start filling out with cardholder data, that payment page, believe it or not, if you look at this payment page source code, there's all kinds of there's Google Tag Manager callouts, there's Adobe Tag Manager callouts, there's these scripts that run that gather business intelligence and user telemetry, which they can be used on you later on. That's even though there hasn't been a whole lot of visibility into this stuff for security professionals and application people, the social media people, that's how they make their living. They collect all this data about you and then weaponize it and use it against you. But a lot of those scripts and a lot of those tag managers can actually do things like scrape the screen or capture input field data, like the primary account number or even login credentials. So I have been kind of evangelizing about this for quite some time, and I was very pleased to see in 4.0, the council's finally got some language in there. There's 2 requirements. There's 6.4.3 that essentially says, for any payment page, and I think they ought to include payment redirection pages for this too. For any payment page that's associated with e-commerce, the application people and the OPSEC people and everybody else who's associated with securing that system, they have to inventory all the scripts and all the tag managers and all that stuff, and then they have to do a risk assessment on that. And they got to be able to justify that from a business perspective. And in all fairness, 2.2.2 in the current version, or 3.2.1 version of PCI DSS says you do not enable or add any unnecessary scripts, services, ports, any of that kind of thing, and you should only have the minimum amount of functionality you need to process whatever you're going to process, and you add nothing else. Well, this client-side web browser is going completely orthogonal to that. So fortunately, they've got some language in there, and they're basically saying that you have to inventory, you have to do a risk assessment. If it's not justified, get it off the payment page. And once again, I think they should do it with respect to payment redirection pages as well. There's a great movie that I saw last year that pretty much scared, almost turned my hair white. It's called The Social Dilemma. And it's about it's a documentary about how, and it actually interviewed the people that created a lot of this intelligence gathering, and basically, they're even probably using some form of AI and data correlation to figure out what how they can make you click through more stuff so they can get paid more. And in addition to that, the movie talks about the social impacts of, I think we talked earlier about the people nowadays are so trusting. They'll put anything on the internet. They don't necessarily worry about privacy, especially young people. And so for years and years and years, if they're using Facebook or whatever, or Twitter, or even Google for that matter, there's quite a portfolio, a manifest of information about their personal lives, their habits, all that kind of stuff. And so then they start feeding back, especially to like there's one section in the movie about how teenage girls nowadays are so image conscious, and they're getting fed through this weaponized social media stuff things about bulimia and anorexia, and then and they're getting fed with the information for groups of people like that stick together, and then they teach them how to to basically lose weight the worst way you can try to do it. So and there's been a lot of teenage suicides with girls, and so there's what people really don't understand is this stuff's been going on for a long time. It has a huge impact. And as it relates to 4.0, at least finally we've got something in there with 6.4.3, which will help us, at least on the e-commerce side. Now, they caveated that with, they basically say that this requirement doesn't go into effect until 2025. So sounds like a long way away. But I mean, if you don't have any idea how to take care of this or do this, you really need to start looking into it now. And there's another requirement called 11.6.1, and it specifically talks about making sure that the HTTP headers and a lot of the information that gets sent to a client-side web browser doesn't change from when it's either executed or sent from a server. It shouldn't change when you're inside the browser. So there has to be a way they're going to have to do change detection, and FIM will not work here. So fortunately, there's some technology out that will help with all of this. One of my favorite companies and technologies that I've been working with for a couple of years, I've actually about 4 years now. I actually help them write a technical paper on this stuff. They're called Feroot, Feroot. And what they have is a software as a service that actually essentially is a sort of like a system in the middle. They call it a headless browser, and it inhales all those scripts and it runs correlation on them, and it figures out, okay, this is a dangerous script. This violates OWASP. This is actually stealing credentials. And so I'm a big fan of that stuff. The team is actually getting solicited by a couple of other companies that do something similar, but they involve adding agents to servers, which we all know most admins aren't too thrilled about doing that. But the great thing about Feroot is they were the first to market. It's the most effective. It can detect this stuff, it can alert on it, and it can block it.
You've been listening to the Truvantis Risk Radar.